Okay, welcome to today's very exciting video, which is how to get an 87 extending on closing government, which is the round I debated in round 3 on at the LSE Open, I think 2 weeks ago, but depending on when this video is out, could be more time. Cool, so the motion was, this house is Putin regrets Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Look, I understand again, this is a very controversial motion. The CAs also themselves talked about it at the competition. So if you are, for some reason, you don't want to watch this video, you can stop right now. But the reason I'm still wanting to make this video is because a lot of my viewers are from all across the world, from what I understand. So and if they get motions like this, they'll need to be prepared or at least better understand them. The motion does not reflect my personal opinion, although maybe in this situation there is kind of a lot of correlation with it. But yeah, all of the motions that I do in general because I want to do them for educational purposes. Okay, so as usual, what were the statements that were generated? You can pause the video right here and you can also generate them. But these were the general ideas that I had. So I had two very fun ideas that my partner Radko didn't allow me to run, which usually happens because I have sometimes batshit crazy ideas that I think win the debate. Like two of them are that this will lead to a Russian civil war and secessionist regions will start pulling away, like Chechnya and Chukotka and all of these, and Dagestan and all of these obscure territories in the Russian Federation. He didn't really buy it. I also thought that this would lead to Putin being assassinated. He also didn't really buy that. I think these are two fun ideas that you could run from CG if you had a very good opening government. But in the end, we didn't run these ideas, and what we ended up running was that this would harm his legacy. And we also had two other ideas as to how this leads to him losing power with the oligarchs and him losing power with the support of people. Because at the end of the day, those are more or less the three marginal things that do change and shift within the debate. So those were the three ideas that we had in prep. And in that moment, we generally discussed how the debate would play out. The general thought process was that opening government would most likely run a variation of this. And we needed to see critical burdens that we needed to fill out when extending, which I'll cover later. And from opposition side, because we're closing government, we have time, we commented that the most likely strongest push will be that they will be able to retain the territories that he occupied, and that this will be a massive victory both economically and politically and things like that. Which, if opening opposition doesn't run, at least closing opposition will run. So at least one of the oppositions will run this, which is in general the strongest claim coming from opposition in this debate, which is that it kind of worked. He most likely will win those territories, and that's most likely a victory for him. So that's why he wouldn't regret it. So basically the way it worked is we had to position the case in response to this idea and explain why it either outweighs it or directly responds to it. So basically using the case to win against them. As this played out, we generally had some analysis that I'll cover more constructively. But for the sake of the breakdown for closing government, let's skip that and let's see what happened within the debate. So on opening opposition, I really don't remember what they were running, since honestly I was focusing on opening government since they were the biggest risk to us. And I also needed to position and vertically extend the argument, so to make sure that we're not called derivative, to make sure I am not actually running things that they talk about and things like that. So what we ended up doing is we split our responsibilities. Radko was focusing, the government whip with whom I was partnered with was focusing on opening opposition, listening to them and writing rebuttal to them. I was focusing on opening government. What I did remember was that at one moment there was one response from opening opposition to opening government, which was that he already has full control over the oligarchs because, you know, he can execute them, he can basically get rid of them, he can take their levers of power, like nationalize their companies and things like that, which was super strategically important for our case, because the opening opposition didn't really realize that this, as much damage it does to opening government, it did equal damage to their case. Because presumably, if Putin can literally control the oligarchs and this doesn't change within the debate, his power remains more or less the same, then that means that analyzing why you win or lose power with the oligarchs is irrelevant. So this was strategically important for me to note. And basically, the POIs that we asked to opening opposition were along the lines of, okay, if you concede that he has power with oligarchs, and we agree with you completely, why does this change anything in the debate? Why is this clash comparative? Why does your analysis land on there? To which they didn't really have a good response, and was a good setup of the framing afterwards. What did OG do? Basically, they did the standard running as much material as possible. They ran that this would decrease power with the oligarchs. This would decrease cooperation with the West in general, because you look like now a pariah state. This leads to your people being unsatisfied, and all of these things. The general problem with opening government was that their analysis was super messy and not connected, which, depending on the judge, this could be either a problem or a benefit from the closing government, because some judges don't really have a problem with this like that, and they just track robotically, and then they say, oh, they proved this and that and that. Some judges want more methodological approach to argumentation and connecting them, and so that the argument makes coherent sense. But the bottom line is they had many pieces of analysis in different places, which, like, in general created a challenge for me to track what exactly they were proving and what exactly were they not proving. But the broad chunk of their case went along the lines of, because there were sanctions imposed on you, this led to an economic decline on you, and you didn't really need to invade, because before that you in general were had lots of military success, whether it's the invasion of Crimea in 2014, whether it's invasion of I think Georgia was the country, whether it's dealing with Syria, and I think the fourth one was with the Chechens. So basically they clearly were winning the top half because they were able to I think deal with a lot of the things coming from opening opposition and still provide some kind of marginal benefit and things like that. So what did CO do? CO, and keep in mind, this is after my speech, so I'm extending, and then closing opposition stands up and runs. They run the first thing, which is that there's a big chance that you'll win these territories. This is the biggest claim that they ended up pushing. I think they very well analyzed it, to be completely frank to them. And I think they very well impacted, explaining how this leads to economic improvement in Russia. This leads to prestige and things like that. So I think they did it well. Where they ended up not doing well is in the second portion of the extension speech. They ran multiple different claims. They ran this leads to rise of far right parties. This leads to undermining the power of the West, and all of these type of things, which in general were not very well substantiated and very well proven. But in prep, we already knew that, and we had ready rebuttal against that in the whip speech. So this, I think, a thing that people don't really get is that when you are closing government or closing opposition, you also have to anticipate things that you need to respond to in the whip, so that the whip is ready to go. At least for the most obvious cases, even if it doesn't come in opening opposition, it will for sure come in closing opposition, especially as you get to better and better rooms. So this was CO. So what was my strategy in extending? So given this moment, I have an opening opposition that outframes the oligarchs clash, but they harmed themselves, and they're trying to prove that I really don't remember their case, but I think it was along the lines of this leads to greater stability and greater control within Russia, versus opening government that says you had military success beforehand, so your benefit is not exclusive, and we have some benefits, we have some harms around the lines of sanctions and things like that. So the first thing that we did in extending was simply outframe this clash, that it's simply not a tipping point, that the Putin has a very strong position of power already within Russia. And that means that whether or not you give an analysis that proves that he has more or less control doesn't really matter, because it's not a tipping point within the debate. And this was something that opening opposition analyzed for us. Secondly, we did metric setting about legacy and why Putin really cares about his legacy. So this was a bit more softer, not so tangible impact, but you could still win with this impact if you have, let's say, enough finesse when you are running it. So here actually you leave the comfort zone of like tangible impacts and you go to these more abstract impacts. But given that this is an actor motion, if you do this well, and if you really well explain it, it becomes a very powerful thing within the debate in terms of the metric that you're pushing out. And from there, just two things. The first is counterfactual, since this is a regret motion, why his image or like his legacy would have been great, and most likely it would have continued to be great for a very long time, and basically why his image to the current and future Russian people will be tarnished because of this military action that he did. The intuition pump that we used is that he would be closer to Ivan the Terrible rather than, let's say, Ekaterina the Great or someone like that in Russian history. So this is like the whole case that we used as a strategy. It fit well against the top half, and it really did push out a very good substantial claim within the debate, and it addressed the closing opposition case that was about to come. So this is like the skeleton. Let's look at each individual aspect of of these points. And by the way, if you were to like technically imagine it, I would have sheets of paper for all of these things. So like I would have sheet of paper for outframing, sheet of paper for metric setting, sheet of paper for counterfactual, sheet of paper for why this harms like the Russian people and his image ultimately and things like that. Cool. So let's look at how I outframed. So firstly, I pointed out that opening opposition have explained that he has control over the oligarchs and people, that this is a military state, that there is no opposition, that and that this to a large degree mitigates their impacts. To which I had to point out as well that opening government did have a response to it, but the response wasn't very particularly strong and persuasive to prove that there is a tipping point. I don't even remember what the response was, but it was something important to note to persuade the judge that this is still the framing that we're operating in, that he doesn't really care about these things because he has a lot of control. Practically, there is no opposition against him, and like to claim that he will fall out in the debate is most likely you are debating this in unicorn land or something like that. And this is not something that any team in the debate truly contested. But at the same time, teams ran things within this framework, which was a bit strange. So, how did we then metric set about legacy? The way we explained legacy is how will he be perceived while he is still alive, and how future generations of Russian people who are belonging to the Russian state will perceive him as a leader. Whether or not he is perceived as a good or bad leader, as a state builder, as someone who managed to save them, or someone who managed to crumble their lifetime. And so this is how we illustrated it. Why does he care about this? The first and most basic reason is that this person is materially super well off. Like, there are some estimates that he has like $200 billion in assets or stuff like that, which is like you can't really prove it, but just imagine being like the pseudo dictator of the third largest country on the planet. Probably you're loaded, probably you've experienced great things in life materially speaking, so you don't really care so much about the material world. Plus, something that we added is that he's also old. So like, the fact that he's old means that he less and less cares about these things and more cares about things that are closer to the end of his life, like how will he be perceived and things like that. Secondly, that this person is a pure egomaniac. Like, just like imagine for a second what it's like to be Putin, right? Like, you are in control of the largest landmass of the planet of 150 million people. You all the time feel as if like you are you are like the greatest person in this country. You have all of the power, and you like really care about like how people perceive you, and you being your image being viewed as good, and things like that. And you could explain it, the fact that he reached this position means that he's truly an egomaniac who cares about these things. And thirdly, anecdotally, he thinks of himself this way. So if you look at interviews, the way he talks about the dissolution of the USSR being like the biggest tragedy, the way that he talks about himself in terms of like, if you watch the Tucker Carlson interview, like how he talks about Russia and like history and what were the like great mistakes against it and how it could be great and things like that. This person views himself as the Tsar. He views himself as like the dictator, like the big strong man. He's basically high on his own supply in this moment, and this is something he really cares about and wants like his image in throughout history to be remembered as one of the great states builders of Russia. Again, this is a soft impact. It's not a hard impact per se, but it's still something that you could tie to the actor as being very important to him, very important to his incentive system, very important to his world building. And again, it doesn't have to be in actor debates. It doesn't have to be the most tangible thing, so far as you are still able to explain that the actor does care about these things. So after we've outframed and we've done the metric setting, the first thing is counterfactual. So like this is pretty easy, but like I really had a fun time explaining this. Before him, like Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin was in power, who's like known as the drunk funny guy. Like if you want to pause the video and Google like epic fails of Yeltsin where he's drunk or funny and things like that. But like more structurally, basically during this guy's tenure, Yeltsin, Russia economically bankrupted. There were there are very famous images of like people waiting in lines at McDonald's because literally McDonald's was the cheapest food that people could afford at the time. You for example had like whole industries collapsing. You for example had like during privatization of industry, because before that it was nationalized, it being sold for pennies and like people losing their money, hyperinflation happening. But also secondly, there was a rising criminal activity, and it's not like just criminal activity like people would rob people and stuff like that. No, organized crime happened during the 90s and during Yeltsin's tenure. There are things. This is all across Eastern Europe, not just in Russia. There are things like kidnappings, like in broad daylight, your car being stolen, you being beaten up, public executions of people, and stuff like that. Due to this, it was like full on dystopia in the 90s. And basically, Putin was the one who resolved these things after when he came into power. The first thing is like economically, Russia saw an improvement during his tenure. This was because like he enforced like market reforms, but also, to be honest, he also enforced not just market reforms, but he, for example, renationalized some of the privately owned enterprise, like I think the natural gas resources and things like that. Again, I'm not like the super most well-versed person about this, but I think I generally understand it. And people like connect Putin as the person who like basically rose up the Russian economy from the ashes. And in the early 2000s, especially seeing like an economic boom. Some of this is pure luck, to be honest, because like it also was connected with the fact that gas prices also just skyrocketed at the time and Russia became a bit richer. But it doesn't matter because it's still the perception that individuals have with him. Secondly is he curbed crime. And this isn't to say like he started enforcing like police control and things like that. He didn't, obviously, because he's part of the KGB, which is part of the criminal organization. But what he did was he curbed it by telling people to keep it more hidden, to keep it more control, to stop like the worst excess of these type of things, like for example, public executions, for example, stealing cars in broad daylight and things like that. It's still like a problem in Russia and across Eastern Europe today because like these people still exist. It's just that their activities are more hidden, because he was like, yeah, we need to still regain like the trust of the people and stuff like that. I need to be a reformist, but like this. But basically, the bottom line is, people had a very good opinion on him based upon their material well-being. People now lived less scared. People now lived with greater economic capacity for themselves. People associate him as the person who came and brought back Russia from the ashes. And this image of him and the counterfactual that we present would have meant that Russia would have proceeded in the alternative without invading Ukraine, proceeded to be, like a, in general, good country with good liberties towards its people, less criminal activity, more economic improvement and things like that. And the war stopped this. This was the second part of the analysis as to how the war stopped this. So, how did the war harm his legacy? The first most basic thing is that there are a lot of economical harms that happened to that. but not in the way of the way opening government analyzed it by saying that like there are a lot of sanctions, but in the way of how military spending likely led to the cannibalization of the economy. Meaning, we analyze this in two ways. The first, in the war itself, you wasted a lot of military supply, which means that you had to recreate them back in order to continue your war efforts. But secondly, in terms of you militarizing the war more post-war in being able to control these territories. So it doesn't even matter if the war ends tomorrow. If for the next 3 or 4 years Russia still has to be a militarized state and still has to like keep resources to these territories in order to make sure that they retain them, because they fear like a counter attack that may happen by the Ukrainians or like some kind of other force of militaries of the world and things like that. Which general means that Putin has to do things like raise taxes, Putin has to do things like allocate government spending on these type of things. And the way that we impacted this was to say that given there is a timeline of the world utilizing fossil fuels, after which we will most likely go into this like new green system of existing where we target renewable energy and things like that. After this moment, Russia will no longer be a great resource player on the planet because, simply put, people will not buy their main resources they're providing. Meaning that in this period of time, it would have been much better for him in the alternative, where he doesn't invade Ukraine and doesn't have to allocate all of this money to militarization, to other aspects of the economy, like services part of the economy, like maybe, I don't know, some other sector, so it's not dependent. Meaning that in the alternative, when Putin allocates all of this money to this instead of like the livelihoods of people and their standard of well-being, people will remember him as the person who basically screwed over a generation of Russians from their economical capacity, even if like you take out of the equation all of the other things that are bad reasons for the war. This basic reason is why he will most likely in the future be remembered as like a tyrant who basically brought poverty to millions of people, the same way as Joseph Stalin brought poverty with the Holodomor, or whatever that was called, like the famine. Secondly, is that after the war, there were many harms to the liberties and way of life of people. There were things like assassinations, night hours, Prigozhin's revolt, that even if they didn't harm anyone, the fact that you're now living in a country where all of these things are happening and all of these things are normalized means that you feel unsafe, means that you feel as an individual more closer to what was the chaos in the 90s rather than like modern times that you are used to of relative peace and stability. And most likely these things will continue because now like you are in a war, you want to make sure you stop all of the power challenges that you have, so you do things like more assassination, more taking of liberties, and things like that. So people will remember this period as like some problematic thing that you do, and like their liberties and livelihood being taken away. And thirdly, that this is just like a military disaster that happened. So many people died based upon this war. There are so many conversations between people on the phone that the Russian country obviously records. Like all of them are recorded, of like soldiers talking to their like their loved ones as to how this is a military disaster. I remember listening to one where they made it, where they said that this is similar to the war in Afghanistan that the USSR did, which most likely all of these things are hidden now, but will be declassified later down the line after some time. You know, when either Putin dies, which maybe in the next 10 years, and the new regime comes into power, or maybe some like more liberal government may take over. The same way as how after Stalin died, there was like declassification of the crimes of the USSR, which means that people will form an opinion of him as being a tyrant who basically sent up a bunch of people to their death grades. Bottom line is, he will be remembered badly. This is non-contingent on him actually retaking those territories. We just think that these harms to the average Russian and their opinion of him will be solidified based on these three reasons. So bottom line is, his image is harmed. We prove in way we care extremely about. He cares most likely extremely about his image and the way he will be seen in history, and these reasons prove this. Okay, then I sit down, like after I run all of these things. Here, obviously, I'm explaining them a bit more thoroughly and adding pauses, but like I was able to explain all of this in 7 minutes. I sit down, and then closing opposition stands up and runs their case. If you remember about how like winning these territories is actually a net benefit for Russia and things like that. To which we already had preemptive responses. The first is that these territories are not important. Firstly, because they're already turned into rubble. So if you are winning them, but like Bakhmut and Avdiivka that they were barely able to take care of are like completely destroyed. If like you are scared to, for example, build infrastructure there or build something in these resources, if tomorrow Ukrainian forces can take them over, can attack you, you can't really get them. This is the first reason. The second thing was that victory isn't just winning those territories, because in the beginning he promised a short war, like he called it a 3-day special military operation, and he promised he'd take over whole of Ukraine. So this will never be perceived as a huge victory if you just take some portion of it. If you yourself already started out by saying that, oh, we'll take it over, the whole thing, guys, don't worry, if this already brought massive shame to you internally. And finally, that our harms in terms of the military spending harms, in terms of you not being able to focus your resources to other industries and still continue to being dependent on greenhouse gases and things like that, will be greater harms than you taking over these territories. I.e., the average Russian feels an increase in their taxes, feels them losing their job because you have to allocate the resources to the military, but doesn't really feel like you all of a sudden taking all those for a Respublican, like calling them part of Russia and things like that. Which means that on balance, the opinions will most likely be negative, and your image will be tarnished. And yeah, after all of this, this is how you get an 87 at this motion. Again, this is like not the standard way of running this, as people, expect to run like more tangible things. But sometimes you have to be not scared to run a more fluffy and more like emotional case if like the current conditions preside. So if we're talking about literally a person who cares about perception more than material benefits, then this case makes more sense and is more closer to the incentives of him as an actor. So cool. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.